Well, the first thing that I was thinking about something very similar about how you and Mazharul Islam starts off with architecture, your career in a sense, and both of you are the most prominent architects in India and Bangladesh, basically initiating the profession towards the modern direction. And I was wondering how you saw and how you might see Mazharul Islam saw the whole idea about nation building, if you like, modernity, and the modernization process. I mean, because in some sense it is Bangladesh now, it was part of Pakistan, but we shared the same sort of historical moment.
I don't think that we are two countries which are separate. It's one continent. And the issue was very simple, that you are now become free. And when the independence comes, the point is, how do we really express our independence? And the immediate idea comes that how do we link with the past and also connect with the future. And that time, luckily, Corbusier came into picture here, and also everybody went abroad to study. Like Mr. Islam went to Harvard, he went to Harvard, Yale. And the idea was that if we learn something, when we bring it back, I think that period of most of the people, right up to almost 1960s, everybody who graduated abroad and came back, they had this problem that now what kind of work, what kind of things we must do so that that work really becomes the beginning of the place. So it's really asking questions about the beginning. How does one begin? So where does the tradition come? Where is that modernity or modernism? And how do we really do this together? So it was really the search of connecting the past and present. In fact, Kanvinde was slightly older than Mr. Islam. And when he came from Harvard, it was the same story. And we always discussed, but undercurrent was, we had no resources, we had economic problems, we had our social problems, the clients were basically not known, some are known, government clients. They also are saying that we are independent, can we do something? And what is it that will demonstrate this independence? So if you look at the history, even the politicians wanted something new. Social people wanted something new, and naturally architects have come here and then they want to start something new. Also, if you look at the history of modern architecture, 1950 is a very big turning period, even in the world, 50s, 60s. A lot of changes took place there also. I mean, it was really after the war, Second World War. So I think this is not only the phenomena. For us, the phenomena was to find something here, but there was also that devastation, that uncertainty created for them that the world is no more the same. And I think this was the question.
If I may also add here, how I saw Mazharul Islam's approach towards modernity, it's my own interpretation. You may not agree to this, and in a sense, maybe you might react to this too. Well, on the one hand, modernization was very straightforward. There were new building tasks, there were new building types to address in new nation and all that, and architects were engaged to address that. But on the other hand, modernity was also a kind of a new situation, as a sort of, I think, in a kind of social, existential, psychological sense. I think Bangladesh at the time, the immediate past was to be rejected, which was the sort of colonial past, and maybe people dealt with it in a very complicated way. I think Mazharul Islam embraced modernity as a way of returning home. That's how I saw it.
Well, when I saw his building, even the Fine Arts building, which is one of his most significant buildings to me, because I have not seen many, but those which are here, they're good, but that building has a lot more. There are many elements which have come from the contemporary school. The open plan, the open landscape, the columns, the structure. But similarly also it came back and said, all right, what are the local materials and how can we use? Nobody talked about cladding. we began to use, very local material. Brick was common here. And so one of those. Second is also the issues, at that time all over the world where no more air conditioning or expensive stuff. Everybody talked about resources. So then the next question was ventilation, issues, which were connected to maintenance, issues connected to labor. So all these things really brought there. And then the next question is, if we have these tools, if we have a new training of a flexible plan, a new plan, with connected to spaces and jalis and all that, they were there. So the elements which were traditional were now rethought, reinterpreted, and then a plan was made. Actually, it's the transition which happened even in Kanvide's place when he did Atira building in 1950s. That building had very similar vocabulary. He was also searching, because we don't know whether a chhajja is right or a jali is right or a roof is right, or all these things happen. But the thing to see is how it is homogenized. I think the best architects at that time knew how to relate it and create something of their own in addition. So the sensibilities were very important. And those sensibilities you could see in Mr. Islam's work quite a lot. I mean, very delicate. There was not that kind of an idea that he would go into Bangla architecture, It was not at all. I mean, there was no Bangla architecture, but he was really trying to find a way, even the open plan and connection to nature.
That's what I mean, adopting modernity as a way of returning home.
Yes.
Because in the 1950s or after the war, if you're starting off as an architect, what should be the platform on which you operate? Because your past is already kind of very complicated. Do you want to pick this or that? And of course, as I was saying, the immediate past is rejected, which is colonialism. So what you base your work on? And I think in a way, so therefore, if you like, what you're saying is a kind of an abstraction of certain things which are essential to the place.
Also, when you do that, what you say is, first of all, correct. That is how you go to come to. And then the elements, which they talked about in the modern architecture, the free plan and a curtain wall and a structural separation. So those elements became very predominant, and the reinterpretation happened with our technologies and our skills. So this was really the beginning. For example, if you see today, we have that conflict. We have materials available, but we don't have principles.
Well, to return to you then, how did you proceed?
Well, I also started, my first building was Indology, which was built also in 62. And that was using concrete. My house, was done around the same time. The school was done in 64. So all those buildings had a combination of many influences. Corbusier was always behind. History was there. But then I was trying to find out what are the ways to really reinterpret our traditional buildings. Light, first time, for example, I think the Indian architecture talked about light, space, connection to inside, outside. Until that time, the colonial architecture also never talked. It was really a building, enclosure. Now the enclosure begins to really becomes connected, open. Verandas became very important. So climatic devices reinterpreted as architectural elements. And I think that's what I see in his also work. What he did, which I notice in his brick structures, is the delicacy by which he must have decided, I will use brick and I will see how many ways I can articulate the edges, how many ways I can articulate the load-carrying structures, how many ways I can articulate the open and solid and voids. These, I think, are very, very beautifully done by Mr. Islam.
Well, in his work, I see sort of two major phases. The first phase is where he actually used more sort of skeletal structure, column structure, and more free and open plan, as you're saying. The Art College is a very good example of that. And what I also think as working on the pavilion paradigm, just the columns,
That's
and
right.
no walls, really, just the roof, and which is sort of, kind of abstraction of the Bengali building paradigm.
Yes.
But then he moved on to brick. Not that we haven't used brick in our tradition, so but they're kind of very two different psychologies, I think, and two different ways of relating to the ground. One is, lifted up in a sense, no walls, and brick is obviously an architecture of walls primarily, and therefore, and you carve out, openings in a cave-like fashion. So they became really, really heavy, ponderous in a sense. So, and
actually, brick, when Khan used the brick, even in 74, 60, he came in 62 onwards, and then he continued. And even when he used the brick, in his buildings, in his own country, or other people who use brick, unlike Corbusier, the nature of brick and creating a pilaster and a panel wall may be traditional, but this is a new interpretation of really saying, all right, how do I really express it on the outside? And I think the relationship, the massing changed. I think the difference is in the massing of buildings, articulation of buildings, then the apertures. I think those became very different. And that also makes the period very important.
I think he left from
Ahmedabad,
your house,
yes,
which is all very enigmatic, mystical, and also very poignant. He left from your house, he went off to New York, and he died there in the restroom. And he was going back and forth between Philadelphia, Ahmedabad, and Dhaka. And somehow you, Mazharul Islam, and Louis Kahn are tied in one story. And it tells a lot of things, actually. And even now, I don't think it has been fully exposed, On the way back at Heathrow Airport, he met Stanley Tigerman.
yes.
So, and Stanley was coming towards Dhaka because he was doing a project with Mazharul Islam. And Stanley found him at the airport, and he found Lou very distraught. And, was disheveled in his dress, and he thought, he was, in another world and looked very disturbed even. And Stanley talks about that. He has written an article on that. So they sat together, had a cup of coffee or something, and they talked. And then they each left, one for Dhaka, one towards his death. And what Stanley discovered at the time that, Lou was very concerned about two things. First, Mazharul Islam, and then in some sense about what he's doing, which is strange. And I think you might give some light on that. He was concerned about Mazharul Islam because by that time, 1974, Mazharul Islam has gone into active politics. And Lou was concerned, how can an architect leave architecture and join politics? And he was saying, I could not do that. And that led to his other concern, that how does a person like a creative artist as Louis Kahn engage with society? And what is better, like direct activism, as Mazharul Islam was trying to do, and Mazharul Islam might have his own reason to do that. He had his reasons. Or a kind of a high art architecture as Lou Kahn did. So what is...
I don't know. I would guess one thing, that this country, this subcontinent, is a very strange phenomenon. Those who come here and live for a long time, or will come frequently, they begin to see this culture very differently.
Not everyone.
No, I have seen students. I have seen people coming from outside. I have seen Corbusier and also Lou. The thing that happens is, they come for something and then they begin to look at it, and they look at the paradoxes, they look at the poverty, they look at the richness, they look at the culture, but then they begin to look at the beauty, quietness, pleasantness in the faces of people and animals. Everybody is like that, which you don't see in the West at all. I mean, you really find people under stress all the time, whether they are rich or poor. Corbusier talked to me often about it. And he said, you look at the cows, and you look at the women, and you look at the human beings here. And I don't see that they feel the lack of things, that self-sufficiency has nothing to do with monetary values, which, is what West is made of. Similarly, the students, and similarly, Khan had this problem. For example, I don't know whether you read, but I think I have written about Khan before he left. He was in our house, and we were reading and writing, and he says, I was reading in that Chitrakatha about Buddha. Now, why all of a sudden he talks about Buddha, and then how Buddha really slowly went into the stage that he wanted. That means he was already thinking. And I think it has nothing to do with that particular moment of going towards death. No.
No.
It's an age, at a certain age, you begin to think about saying, all right, now my time may be limited, and I want to know, was this really my purpose? Is it really my purpose?
But if we agree with Stanley, he was thinking about his work in life.
No, that's what I'm saying. So also you begin to ask questions that what I have done, because he talked about Corbusier that time again. And he says Corbusier started simplifying. Look at his last buildings. Look at the way he has done the buildings. And I would also like to become simpler, simplify further. And if you look at his work, Mellon Center and others are like this. So MUZHARUL Islam also was like this, because those are all the stages which happened. Not exactly the same. But in India, like for example, why do I do housing? Why I all the time talk about schools? I think, other cultures one would not talk. But one is feeling socially responsible. One feels that one is committed. And in our old tradition, we always use one word called Runanubandh. We are always in debt of our culture. We are eating on this land, the food. We are supported by this land. And someday we must pay back the land. Now this is our tradition. And I'm sure if you ask Mr. Islam, he will tell you the same thing. That yes, that we must pay back. Now the question is, when you see this utter strife happening, the only way you think about it is, how do I pay back this? And that is what made him get into this, because he found somebody who could join hands, or he could join hands and really fight. But it's a fantastic thing to know that somebody who is in the peak of his career, highly respected,
that's right,
talented, with full opportunities, is willing to drop like this, like Buddha dropped. That one day you leave this, you say, it's okay. If I can't do, but my duty now is not this, my duty is this.
I think that's what happened, exactly.
And I don't know whether that time he was almost 59, 60. If it is 80 now.
He was born in 23, I'm trying to calculate.
So 23, 64, yes. 70, 74 you say, no? Right. 55, 60. So these are the periods of transition that happen. But some people it happened fast. And this is what I think must be.
Well, the War of Liberation was a big moment. I think it coincided with that, this more active involvement with...
But it's very difficult. I must admire, I think it's one of the most admirable things for somebody who has everything and is willing to just give away.